of issues in the current political campaign by the two major candidates for the presidency.
And I love you so, those fingers in my hair.
The year 1960 was somewhat of a roller coaster. Although it was sufficiently riddled with political tensions, other aspects were fascinating and enjoyable and evoked a mixture of emotions. In case you missed it, here's everything that happened in 1960. But before we get started, hit that subscribe button or you may lose yourself in a time warp.
I am announcing today my candidacy for the presidency of the United States.
On the second day of January 1960, John F. Kennedy took to the podium to announce his candidacy for U.S. president, and this made him the youngest Democratic candidate to run for president at the time. Of course, his campaign gained massive momentum, and he was declared the winner of the election and president of the United States the following year, narrowly defeating Richard Nixon, who was the incumbent vice president at the time. While the air of patriotism was yet inflamed, the king of rock and roll Elvis Presley was promoted to sergeant during his service in the United States Army. The music icon was drafted to serve 2 years of active duty as well as 2 years in the reserves, and during his draft he was stationed in West Germany. After 2 years of grilling field work, he earned the rank of E7 Sergeant January the 14th of 1960.
Japan, a former foe, is by treaty to be elevated to partnership as an ally.
On January the 18th of the same month, the United States and Japan revised and re-signed a defense treaty that specified that the United States would provide Japan with military support in situations of an external military attack. And in return, Japan would accommodate U.S. armed forces, providing ports and military bases. Things heated up on the first day of February 1960 in Greensboro, North Carolina, where a civil rights sit-in was staged by 4 African-American students at a lunch counter in a segregated part of Woolworth. The students were denied service, and this led to a sit-in protest that triggered many nonviolent protests all throughout the southern parts of the United States. This act triggered a change in activism and freedom protests, and just 6 months later, the same 4 students were served lunch at that counter in that Woolworths.
The wind of change is blowing through this continent.
That incident on the 1st of February was followed 2 days later by the famous Wind of Change speech by British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan in Africa, criticizing an apartheid regime. The royal family wasn't left out of the quirks that year, as Queen Elizabeth II announced on the 8th of February that her family was to be known as the House of Windsor, and the descendants of the royal household would be known by the name Mountbatten-Windsor. This change was pivotal, as the famed Prince Philip's surname at the time was Mountbatten, and therefore would have had to forfeit being a part of the royal lineage. What musical artists dominated in 1960? What new political rivalries were formed? And what major events sent ripples through the ages? Keep watching to find out. Speaking of fame, on the 9th of February, Hollywood had its first taste of immortality as Joan Woodward was honored with the very first star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. The retired American actress saw her rise to fame in the 1950s and earned her stripes by playing the most provocatively complex and outstanding female characters.
Victory ceremonies crown each day with pomp and pageantry. The winner stands highest.
While the sporting world saw a total of 81 medals awarded throughout the 8th Winter Olympic Games in California, which lasted 10 days, the first ever Playboy Club was launched in Chicago on the 29th of February. However, it wasn't all bunnies and fun around the world, because on that same day, an earthquake hit the city of Agadir in Morocco, claiming 12,000 to 15,000 lives. As tremors of an earthquake wreaked havoc on Morocco on the 13th of February, the first atomic bomb testing in the Sahara Desert took place, ordered by Félix Galliard, the French Prime Minister, just after the French Fourth Republic hit a downward spiral in the May 1958 decolonization crisis.
But the Triton had a mission beyond Magellan, to cruise around the world beneath the sea.
On February the 16th, the USS Triton, a nuclear-powered submarine, embarked on a historic underwater voyage around the world. This mission was the first completely submerged circumnavigation of the Earth and was aimed at showcasing the capabilities and endurance of nuclear-powered submarines. The Triton successfully completed the groundbreaking journey in 60 days and 21 hours, utilizing advanced naval technology while contributing to strategic maritime knowledge. Back in the world of music, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, returned from his 2-year outpost in Germany, receiving an honorable discharge certificate. A truly memorable day for all of his fans worldwide. Elvis wasn't the only one gathering accolades, because on the 10th of March, Elizabeth Taylor received a Best Actress award at the 17th Golden Globes for excellent performance in her role as Catherine Hawley in the film Suddenly Last Summer. Some events were out of this world as NASA launched the Pioneer 5, a space probe rocket into orbit to view Venus. The mission on March the 11th was to ultimately demonstrate the efficacy of deep space technology and develop a map of interplanetary magnetic fields.
This bookshop in the heart of London, Lady Chatterley, goes on sale at 12 noon sharp.
Book lovers got a win as D.H. Lawrence's romance novel Lady Chatterley's Lover, which had been banned since 1929 all over the United States and other parts of the world, was finally vindicated on March 25th and apparently not obscene enough for a ban in NYC. The book finally went on sale later in the year after being found not guilty of obscenity, so that was a big win for romance lovers. But we all know that romance comes with a bit of tragedy. Maybe not as tragic as the attack on the president of Iraq on the 26th, which led to the execution of 30 people.
Headquarters of the Bureau of the Census is in Suitland, Maryland, just outside Washington, D.C.
The April 1st population census was also part of the activities this year, as residents of the United States counted 179,245,000, an 18.5 increase since the last one in 1950. Some may argue that the 1960s belonged to the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, and that's not far from the truth. The musical legend released some of the most revolutionary sounds in April. In the RCA recording studio in Nashville, Tennessee, he recorded It's Now or Never, Are You Lonesome Tonight, and Fever. The music icon bagged 3 Grammy Awards that same year with the song Are You Lonesome Tonight. On the 6th of May, the Civil Rights Act of 1960 would be signed into law by President Dwight Eisenhower. The law established that all attempts to stop any population from registering to vote would be faced with penalties. Fast forward to May 10th, and John F. Kennedy had won the primaries held in West Virginia with a massive 61% advantage over Hubert Humphrey. I think we all know the rest of the story. JFK then went on to the White House in 1961.
A Nazi colonel named Adolf Eichmann stood trial in Israel for his part in the Holocaust.
The very next day, Adolf Eichmann, the notorious Nazi war criminal, was apprehended by Israeli troops in Buenos Aires and tried under the law of piracy. The war criminal was convicted on 15 counts and sentenced to pay the ultimate price the following year. The 12th of May was a special day for Elvis Presley fans all over the world. The music icon made an appearance on the Frank Sinatra Timex show. The show was a welcome home special for Elvis, and Sinatra, who was always blunt about his dislike for rock and roll music, turned over a new leaf and sang a duet with Elvis to the songs Witchcraft and Love Me Tender. The special was viewed by 41% of the U.S. population that same evening. You just can't deny the beauty of rock and roll.
She just goes a little mad sometimes.
On that same day, President Eisenhower canceled a trip to Japan due to anti-American demonstrations and tensions in Tokyo. The movie Psycho, directed and produced by Alfred Hitchcock, aired and thrilled audiences on the big screen. The highly rated film dropped on the 16th of June and went on to grab an Oscar nomination the following year. Of course, both events have no connection aside from occurring on the same day. In the world of sports, Boston Red Sox outfielder Ted Williams celebrated his 500th home run on the 17th of June. He finally retired the 28th of September, but not without adding an extra 21 home runs to his record. On June the 21st, Armin Harry, a German 100-meter sprinter, smashed the world record for the fastest time, completing the race in just 10 seconds. The first contraceptive pill in the United States was made available for counter-purchase on June the 23rd. The oral medication Inovid got full approval from all standard agencies, including the FDA.
The plane was brought down by the Soviet Union, neither at the place nor at the time.
On July the 1st, tensions rose between the United States and Russia as a U.S. aircraft was taken down over the Barents Sea by the USSR. Only 2 out of the 6 on board survived, and the United States claimed that the act was unjustified as the plane was within international waters, while the Soviets were adamant that the craft did indeed invade their airspace. It further deteriorated relationships between the two powerful nations. The 4th of July 1960 marked a very special time in American history. On this very day, the new 50-star flag would be unveiled, and it included Hawaii. For the first time, the flag was hoisted at the Fort McHenry National Monument in Baltimore, as well as in Washington at the U.S. Capitol. You may be familiar with the literature masterpiece To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. This book was published the 11th of July and quickly made it to the bestseller and remained there for 41 weeks while also securing the Pulitzer Prize Award the following year. Even though it was Lee's first novel, its lessons reverberated through time as it later became a widely read piece of literature in many classrooms.
The Vice President of the United States, the Honorable Richard M. Nixon.
The latter part of July was full of political rivalries as the Vice President Richard Nixon was nominated as a presidential candidate at the convention held in Chicago, Illinois. Nixon, even though he had lost the race, would go on to become America's 37th president in 1969. Talk about keeping the dream alive. The birth of a new diva took place August 1st in New York as musical legend Aretha Franklin emerged from her first recording session for Columbia Records. The single would be released in September, while her first album made its way to the market the following year. It was an unforgettable moment when NASCAR legend Lee Petty, along with his sons Maurice and Richard, competed against one another for what seemed like the race of the century. It was the trio's first competition together, and the event was held in Birmingham, Alabama on August the 3rd. Ned Jarrett took the first position, Richard came in second, Lee in third, and Maurice lagged behind at eighth. If you're a fan of the 1960s, then you're familiar with the twist, a dance that swept through the nation and got people of all ages in a hip-rotating frenzy. The originator of the dance move, Chubby Checker, performed it on The Dick Clark Show on August the 6th, and that would be the beginning of a trend for the rest of the year. Perhaps it was the effect of doing the twist, but just 6 days after the show, Ralph Boston broke the long jump record by a lengthy 8.21 meters, one that had been unbroken for 25 years. He then went on to break his own record the following year. Francis Gary Powers' U-2 spy trial in Moscow on August the 17th, 1960 was a pivotal Cold War event that deepened U.S.-Soviet tension. Francis Powers was a CIA pilot who was shot down while flying a U-2 reconnaissance plane over Soviet territory in May of 1960, and he was captured by Soviet forces where he was tried and convicted of espionage, receiving a 10-year sentence. The trial would be highly publicized, showcasing Soviet claims of U.S. clandestine intentions. Powers' cooperation with Soviet authorities during the trial was controversial in the United States, but he was exchanged for Soviet spy Rudolf Abel in a 1962 swap. The incident damaged relations between both of the countries.
The Beatles sing Some Other Time.
On the entertainment end, the Beatles had their first public performance at a club in Germany. The performance featured original drummer Pete Best to secure the Hamburg booking. The band played in 2 different locations over the course of 106 nights, laying the foundations for what would later become the best band of all time. On the 19th of August, the USSR spaceship Sputnik 5 was launched into space with the most unusual of passengers, The list consisted of 2 dogs, Belka and Strelka, a rabbit, 40 mice, 2 rats, and a few fruit flies, along with a variety of plants. Interestingly, the animals returned from orbit unscathed. I guess animals can be astronauts too.
The damage done is bound to run into millions of dollars, and in spite of timely warning of the approach of the storm, the loss of 4 lives is reported from this area.
The year, of course, wasn't devoid of natural disasters. On September the 4th, Hurricane Donna wreaked havoc in the Caribbean and the United States for 8 straight days. The disaster, which was formed August the 31st, had claimed 148 lives by September 14th and affected areas like the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, Cuba, and others. The storm finally subsided on the 14th of September. In case you've been wondering who wins the prize for the longest speech ever given, it's Fidel Castro. On the 26th of September, the Cuban president at the time, Fidel Castro, gave a lengthy 4-hour and 29-minute speech, criticizing the aggression of the United States Armed Forces against Cuban revolutionists. Castro's fiery rhetoric and passionate defense of the Cuban Revolution had emphasized the increasing bad blood between the U.S. and Cuba during the Cold War and highlighted his defiance against U.S. policies while asserting Cuba's right to sovereignty and self-determination.
What's new with the Flintstones? Lots of things. Like the most horrendous, hilarious, and gruesome family.
On September the 30th, the very first animated sitcom, The Flintstones, premiered on the ABC network in the United States. Produced by William Hanna and Joseph Barbera, the prehistoric series became a cultural phenomenon and paved the way for various other animated entertainment. On October the 7th, millions of Americans tuned in to bear witness to the second debate between Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy. This was followed by a third debate on the 12th of October, where at least 67 million people tuned in on a televised broadcast. A split screen was used to capture both candidates at the same time and provide the audience with real-time reactions from both candidates.
He began his career as a Baptist preacher, but went on to lead a sweeping grassroots effort to end racial discrimination.
October 19th is culturally significant, marked as a reminder of the arrest of Martin Luther King in Atlanta, Georgia during a sit-in protest. The movement was aimed at challenging institutional racism and the advancement of civil rights. The political philanthropist, along with 52 other people, had staged a non-violent sit-in, refusing to leave their seats after a segregated lunch counter in Atlanta refused to serve them. The protest was part of a more broad wave of similar actions taken in the quest to achieve racial equality. Boxing fans witnessed the making of a legend as Cassius Clay, who had become later known as Muhammad Ali, took his first professional fight, defeating Tony Hunziker in the 6th round on points. The 30-year-old Clay showed a level of class that was well above his years, an excellent professional debut.
Louis Leakey has spent his lifetime roaming a wild and desolate land.
The debate on the credibility of the theory of evolution has been a topic of scientific argument for years, but on November the 4th of 1960, something was discovered that may be pivotal to understanding the human origin. Archaeologists Mary and Louise Leakey discovered the jaw fragments of the first Homo habilis in Tanzania. The fossils were located in a gorge and dated back 2.4 to 1.5 million years, and it was no doubt this discovery outdated the Asian Homo erectus specimen, further proving the accuracy of the theory of evolution. On November the 8th, the elections in the United States came to an end, and John F. Kennedy was elected as the 35th President of the United States, beating incumbent Richard Nixon with a narrow win, the closest in the history of the U.S. elections.
Kind of flipped it to the net, and somehow the goalie didn't see it.
As the year slowly wrapped up, Gordie Howe took the hockey world by surprise. After his 938th NHL game on November the 27th, he became the first hockey player to hit the 1,000-point mark. While Howe had previously won awards, like the Art Ross Trophy for the highest points scored in 4 consecutive seasons, the 1,000-point marker was the pinnacle of an exceptional career. In a dramatic turn of events for the Beatles, Paul McCartney and original drummer Pete Best were arrested on December 1st and then deported from Hamburg, Germany on charges of attempted arson. This took place just days after George Harrison was deported when officials discovered he was under the age of 18 and not legally cleared to play the concerts. With the band already grappling with his sudden exit, the arrest of McCartney and Best was the final nail in the coffin, forcing them to end their Hamburg season prematurely since they were down to just 3 members.
In the 1940s, the discovery of a new isotope, carbon-14, was of particular interest to University of Chicago chemist Willard Libby.
In the field of science, Willard Libby was awarded the Nobel Prize on December the 10th for his groundbreaking development of carbon-14 dating. His discovery revolutionized archaeology and paleontology by giving scientists a means to accurately determine the age of ancient artifacts and fossils. Libby provided a reliable method of putting a date to organic materials by measuring the decay of carbon-14 isotopes, thereby opening new avenues for understanding human history and the evolution of life on Earth.
At Cape Canaveral, the 7 United States Project Mercury astronauts are among the observers at the firing of a Redstone rocket carrying an unmanned space capsule.
The year 1960 may have been a roller coaster of mixed emotions, but it ended in the best way possible, because on December the 19th, the United States launched Mercury Redstone 1A from Cape Canaveral, the first successful project launch with the objective to assess spacecraft launch performance. Needless to say, it was a huge success. If you're curious about the high-risk activities, nuclear attack drills, gossip party lines, and wacky habits of the 60s, check out our video, 20 Things from the 1960s Kids Today Will Never Understand. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.